This may be a surprise to hear, but there's no jobs today. Apparently we've either got a handle on it all or the beasties are taking the week off. I would suggest taking the day. Clock off, punch out early and relax. Whether you're on the road or resting in town, have a bath, lounge on the beach, do some shopping, have a hot spring episode. It's important to take time to rest when you can. Don't neglect your well-being in the pursuit of greatness. You never know when you'll get another chance. Especially in this gig economy nightmare we all work in. We still have some news and announcements to go through, so... The Alarial Ministry of Security has announced that they are placing a seemingly arbitrary ruling against party headcounts over 6 members. Apparently, any more than that is too many to keep track of, and it becomes increasingly difficult if the party splits up. In the news, a sailing ship has re-entered the port town of Laurel in the Amidian Federation. Allegedly, the ship gently crashed into the docks, and upon investigation, it was revealed that no one was on board. Records show it was a merchant vessel that set sail 17 years ago, before going missing during a storm. The local guard have not called for adventurer intervention at this point, so we'll just leave it to them until asked. Otherwise, there's nothing else, and I'm not expecting any updates, so we'll skip the break in the middle of this session. Let's get on with the story. I fumbled with the exam results in my hands, checking them and double-checking them to make sure I did in fact read them correctly. I did. I had passed. I took a deep breath and folded the paper up, placed it back in the envelope and then into my coat pocket. I couldn't help but grin. I could see why few people passed the exam. Geit was ferocious and my pack was still stinging from his strike. If his blade was unsheathed, that would have been it for me. Cut down in a short moment of blind arrogance against a foe far more experienced. Realistically, I should have known that trying to counter his feint wouldn't have worked, but I'm glad I tried it, as it taught me a valuable lesson regarding my attitude in battle, and it was a lesson that didn't kill me to learn. Raining again. I thought I could smell rain in the air before the exam, but I was too distracted to really notice. I looked at the dark, cloudy sky through the windows as the first drops began to fall. The rain immediately soothed my nerves about what was to come, though the smattering of droplets quickly turned to a deluge. I stepped outside and was greeted again by Valuine. With naught but a grin, she hurriedly took my arm and dragged me away from the circling veterans who were trying to ask me about my results. We trudged through the rain, which Val was largely unaffected by thanks to her long hooded cloak.
How did it go?
Do you need to ask? Aren't you already convinced of the answer?
Passed with the rank of D?
Passed with the rank of D.
I never doubted.
I'm noticing that about you.
Who was your examiner?
I'll give you 3 guesses.
No. You didn't get Geit, did you?
Wow, first guess. Impressive.
You passing is what's impressive. Geit is a hard ass, and as a former adventurer, he's downright ferocious. What did you do that was worth a passing grade?
I very nearly landed a hit.
Right, okay. Well, it doesn't sound as amazing when you word it like that. But I can imagine how difficult actually landing a blow would likely be.
I feel acknowledged. Where are we going?
To link up with our new client. The expedition to the Shadowlands leaves in about an hour. I've already moved our belongings to the caravan we'll be taking there.
It really is right to it then, huh?
That's the way of this line of work.
After a few minutes of jogging through the rain to avoid a potential lightning strike, we arrived at what appeared to be a clearing just beyond the city gates. The caravan was in sight. It was comprised of 8 large carriages. Several carts had a pull-out awning open with caravanners huddling beneath, chatting or smoking, covered from the rain. I followed Valuine as she picked out an older man from the crowd. He greeted her with a warm smile, and they shook hands before he reached out for mine. I took it and introduced myself. He said his name was Rafe, and that he was the leader of this expedition. He explained that they were heading to the Shadowlands to join a research team who had an outpost there. He gestured to the carriages. They were carrying materials and supplies alongside skilled tradesmen and their families who were planning on expanding the research outpost into a settlement. The caravanners were counting on us to get them and their gear there safely. Valuine moved under an awning, pulled out a map from a pouch, and began plotting a course to the Shadowlands. I looked around for a second, a little lost for purpose, before deciding to check in on the animals. I approached the nearest Nevian bull, its hulking size dwarfing me. I calmly extended a hand to pet the creature, running my fingers over a shaggy brown tuft in its otherwise white hair. Their double coats are so thick that snow and rain just runs off the top. The shearling coat I was wearing at the time was actually insulated with Nevian wool. It was probably the only reason I survived walking through all that snow a few months back. Hey, boy. You doing okay? Yeah, I know. Not fantastic weather for a trip, is it? I cast my gaze toward the cart the bull was attached to, filled to the brim with housing materials. I'd heard there were no trees in the shallow lands, that it was just mirror-like ankle-deep water for hundreds of miles in any direction. In that spirit, they'd be safer packing the wood they need. After about 20 minutes of idling, we finally set off. Valuine and I took the reins of the wagon at the front. I placed my sword in the back, and we set off on our new journey. We travelled in contemplative silence for a long stretch of road. The minutes ticked away at an agonizingly slow pace. It felt like we'd been on the road for hours. I couldn't take it anymore. Gods, I'm so bored.
I know you're bored. You keep telling me. I'm not sure why, because it's only been 45 minutes.
Oh heavens, I'm not going to make it. This is it for me. Remember, I fought valiantly.
Are you going to be like this the whole way? You did not fight valiantly. You bitched for nearly an hour and died from being overly dramatic.
This really is terrible. I can see why this job was left up on the board. Is it always like this?
If you're lucky, yes.
Lucky?
Yes, lucky. You are safe for now, but make no mistake, you have joined a line of work that is seldom safe. Enjoy the peace while it lasts.
Now who's being dramatic?
Shut up. Now check the back and see if there's anything interesting in there to keep you occupied.
Oh, nice. There's a guitar in here. I'm sure they won't mind.
It's sure to be a nicer sound than your whining.
The guitar kept me occupied for a few hours. After a time, I noticed the hues of the sky turn from blue to orange.
We need to make camp.
Make camp? We've got hours of daylight yet.
Yes, but we want to make camp before the sun sets. That way we aren't setting up tents in the dark. We left late thanks to the customs office faffing about, so we're just going to have to make peace with not getting very far today. That said, the sooner we pack it in today, the earlier we can start it up again tomorrow.
Okay, that makes sense.
We are hired security, but our duty doesn't stop at keeping these people alive. We also have to ensure they're comfortable, healthy, and making good progress along the way.
We trundled along for a little while longer, down a rather steep hill beside a raging river to our right. The rain had increased its fury, creating intense rapids. We spent barely 5 minutes looking for somewhere to camp when we heard a peculiar noise. A wheel that looked like it belonged to a carriage quickly rolled past.
Oh my! I wonder whose wheel that is.
It was our wheel. In the span of a second, the back right wheel had disappeared down the road. The axle was digging into the ground. Startled by the sudden noise and twisting of the carriage, the bull panicked. It tugged itself free from the breeching strap and scurried off to the left side of the road. The carriage was now veering to the right at an alarming speed. We hit a rock with unexpected force, and Valouine was thrown clear from the carriage onto the muddy ground below, while my legs were swept out from under me. I crumpled in the driver's box and heard Val call out from behind.
Engage the skids!
I had just enough time to stand back up and ask,
"What the fuck is a skid?"
before tumbling over the edge of the riverbank. The carriage fell, crashed into the water, and again I was thrown to the floor of the driver's box. The water was too shallow for the carriage to sink, but deep enough that it prevented the wheels from stopping my drastic increase of velocity downstream. I tried to stand up, but each time the carriage went through a rapid, I was nearly bucked into the water. I had to find a way to regain control of the situation. I looked around, desperate to find anything that would inspire a solution. But before an option presented itself, the worst came to pass. While searching, I spied a rapid further downstream that was substantially larger than the others I had encountered thus far. Oh shit! Jumping from the carriage to the riverbank crossed my mind, but I could barely stand up, let alone find purchase for a jump of that distance. Resigned to staying on the carriage, I held on tight to whatever I could as it crashed into the torrent. The nose of the carriage jammed against a rock beneath the water, tensed and released in the blink of an eye. The resulting action caused the seat to jut upward, throwing me several feet into the air. I took a deep, frantic breath as I hovered above the world. I tumbled back down toward the wagon, but I couldn't control my landing. I fell flat. My stomach crashed into a wooden edge, knocking the wind from my lungs. My vision went blurry from the hit, and then cloudy as I was thrust into the water. I felt my head strike a rock just under the surface, causing me to lose my sense of direction. I flailed in a violent abyss for a few seconds, trying to regain my senses, when I realized I was only making things worse. I was under the water, and I had no air in my lungs, so I knew I had to resurface as soon as possible. I reached out to feel for something, anything, and felt the riverbed brush under my fingertips. That would do, I thought, as I dug my fingers into the ground. Finally anchored, I used the purchase to turn my body, allowing my feet to press against the floor. I had mere seconds to act, so I quickly tried to push up to the surface. But I moved barely an inch before feeling a hard bump on the back of my head. Something was above me, something wide and solid. I was pinned underneath the carriage. At this point, I was fighting every second to keep from panicking further. I opened my eyes, but couldn't see anything substantial in the shadowed, blinding current. I had to stay as calm as possible, control myself, but no deep breaths. I couldn't breathe, no matter how much I wanted to. My vision, which was already useless, was beginning to darken even further. I could feel the loss of focus stretching out from behind my eyes. I was losing consciousness. I could have only been underwater for maybe 30 seconds, but my lungs were screaming for air. I stretched my arms out beside me to feel for something and got my fingers around the edge of the undercarriage. I felt a surge of strength and dragged myself out from under the vehicle and again attempted to push up from the riverbed. This time, I felt the water part from my face as I emerged from the river. I tried to figure out where I was. I looked to the riverbank but couldn't see anyone. I saw the carriage sail back into view and begin moving past me. Thankfully, it was still in one piece and hadn't capsized. I tried to grab some overhanging branches, but none could support me without snapping, so I continued downstream, furiously kicking to stay afloat. I tried to swim in any direction, but felt the water swirl and wrap itself around me. I must have hit another rapid, but I couldn't even see it before it already had me. I barely had time to take half a breath before being dragged underwater again. I had air this time, so it was much easier to stay calm. I waited for the swirling to stop and re-emerged from the water. Clearing the water from my face and eyes to see, I found I was close to the carriage again. I reached out and grabbed the reins flapping in the wind beside it, and then used them to drag myself closer. I tried to steady myself again as I clung to my only lifeline, and suddenly I felt my feet hit the floor while my head was still above water. This was my chance. I maneuvered myself to the left side of the carriage, digging each footstep into the soft riverbed. I wrapped the breeching strap around my forearms and pulled hard as I could. My muscles strained to the point I thought I would tear my own hands off, but I continued to try and summon all of my strength. In an instant, it felt as though I'd been struck by a lightning bolt that travelled straight to my heart. I pulled, and the carriage moved. With strained step after strained step, I dragged the wagon up onto the riverbank. I turned to find a slip-off slope behind me. The end was in sight. I continued to pull, dragging over a ton of materials and equipment out of the water. I dragged it up the slope onto the flat land and tied it to a tree to stop it rolling back into the river. I stumbled back a few steps, glanced at the riverbed, and felt the head rush build. Again, my vision went blurry as I felt my brain double in weight. When I tried to stop myself from falling forward, I discovered my legs had near turned to jelly underneath me. After a single wobbly step that didn't actually go anywhere, I collapsed onto my back, exhausted. As I stared up at the brightening clouds, the rain slowly came to a stop. I wasn't sure how much time had passed as I laid there, but I soon heard Valouine running down the dirt road to find me.
There you are. Are you alive?
I couldn't really bring myself to say anything, so I raised my hand into the air and gave a limp wave.
By the gods, that was scary. You really had me worried for a while there. For the record, the skids are the brakes.
Then call them the brakes.
Right. Lesson learned. Are you still bored, though?
Right. Lesson learned. Have you got a towel?
I think there's one on our wagon. I gotta hand it to you. This was impressive. Not only are you alive, but you managed to drag nearly 2 tons of weight out of the river, and I thought you were strong before.
Adrenaline is a hell of a thing. The area I pulled the wagon up onto turned out to be the ideal place to camp, so when the rest of the caravan arrived, they began setting up. Valouine patched up the wound on my head. I'd gotten away with just a few stitches this time, but it could have been a lot worse. I received numerous thanks from the members of the expedition, as well as a toast in my name at supper time. I was unfortunately so exhausted that I barely spoke. I ate my stew quietly by the fire. I didn't really have the heart to tell them I wasn't thinking about their stuff while travelling down the river. My sword was somewhere on that wagon, and that's largely why I saved it. I had laid said sword out next to the fire, drying it and the scabbard out to prevent rust. I was busy staring into the flames, thinking on the day's events when someone approached me from the larger camp.
Hi. Thanks for saving our stuff earlier. Oh, I'm Nira, the smithy's apprentice, by the way.
Oh, hey, it was no problem. Just seemed like the right thing to do.
I see you carry a sword. May I take a look?
Sure. Go ahead. She picked up the blade and carefully admired it in the firelight.
This is an interesting style of sword. I've just started studying weapons, and I've not seen any of its like.
Oh? What's so strange about it?
Well, mostly it's that the proportions are all mixed and matched. I can't tell what family of blade this is supposed to be from. From crossguard to pommel, it's designed for 2 hands, but the blade is too short. It's a great sword hilt on an arming sword blade. And you wear it over your shoulder rather than on your hip?
Yeah, I find the backstrap more comfortable, but regarding the sword itself, I don't know too much about its construction. I was unaware it was unique at all. She pulled out a small toolkit from a pouch on her hip and sank into an intense focus. She struck the blade with what looked like a tuning fork.
Ah, interesting.
She then scraped something down the blade, causing long, streaking sparks to fly out into the fire.
That's very high quality work. The craftsman who made it focused far more on making it durable rather than pretty. The most it has in the way of decoration are these flowing ripples in the blade. That means this was made by folding different types of steel together to make it stronger. At a glance, it's very plain, but this is one of the most robust weapons I've ever seen.
She mused over the blade, and Valouine approached her from behind.
A fine weapon indeed.
The apprentice offered it up to Valouine, who took it and looked it over. For a moment, she appeared to be lost in a memory again. After a few seconds, she handed it back to me.
I certainly don't see it shattering any time soon.
A funny choice of words. As I took the hilt into my palm, I remembered my brother handing it to me for the first time back in his shop. I told him I didn't want a custom sword, and asked for him to give me something simple off the rack. I explained I would struggle to use something with such sentimental value, and it would break my heart if the blade shattered. He laughed and told me he'd rather the sword shatter than I, and if it spared me death at the cost of its existence, it would have done what it was made for. A warm memory. We all chatted a little while longer, and the smithy's apprentice gave me some oils to treat the blade before eventually retiring for the night. Val and I took shifts keeping watch, and before we knew it, the morning rolled back around. I slept, quickly and deeply, but felt as though barely any time had passed when I woke. After a brief, caravan-wide meeting about carriage safety and a lengthy check of all the wagons, we continued on the journey. For the majority of the ride, I sat quietly and played guitar to try and soothe the shaking of my hands, a side effect of the torn muscles from fingertips to shoulders. I was sure not to complain about boredom for a while after the river debacle. A few days later, we reached the outer fields surrounding Easthallow, a farming town. Through the thick morning fog, we could see the rows and rows of crops stretching out into the distance, with a small town at their centre. I was glad to see a little civilization. That meant I could relax for the night properly, in a proper bed, and enjoy some safety. We approached the town gate, and were directed to an area just outside the walls where we could set up the caravan. We had arrived a little ahead of schedule, and it was only 5:30 in the morning when we stepped off the carriage. Rafe, the expedition's leader, told us that since we were doing so well, and given that we'd been on the road for a few days, we would be free to stay in this town until the following morning while he managed supplies and restocking. I was so excited to sleep in an inn or something, anything better than roughing it on a bedroll. Val and I had about 24 hours in this town, and quickly made an agreement as to what we'd do for it.
All right, we don't have a lot of time. We know what our most important task is, right?
Pub?
Pub! I'm going for the works. Bath with warm water, big, soft bed, and a drink of something strong and fruity.
We walked straight to the village's inn and were warmly greeted by the owner setting up for the breakfast rush. I spent a full gold piece on food and drink, and there's few things better than a full Alarian breakfast with coffee and orange juice. Eggs fried in butter, thick-cut bacon, pork sausages, baked beans, and shredded potatoes fried in the bacon fat. Oh, Val, I thought this bacon was named after you, but it actually says thick cut.
Oh, very cute.
A lot of people think that baked beans in tomato sauce need to simply be heated in a pot, but that is untrue, and anyone who claims that does not have your best interests in mind. They need to be gently simmered for a good few minutes until the sauce reduces a bit and the beans soften, and then a pinch of salt to top it off. Any other way is sacrilege. Valouine went upstairs to her newly rented room to bathe, while I, frankly, gorged myself on 3 people's worth of food. It was delicious. But as usual, my eyes were bigger than my belly, and I started to feel a bit bloated. I had to walk it off. My gear was still on the wagon, but I figured I could get it later, so I simply strolled around the misty streets for a few minutes. I looked at the architecture, enjoyed the morning sun, got a feel for the town. There was barely anyone out this early. I passed maybe 1 or 2 people heading toward the town centre, dragging carts or carrying baskets full of produce. It was market day here. That's probably why Rafe insisted we stop. But there I was, walking off my breakfast, minding my own business, when I felt it. My hackles going up. What was happening? The mist was thickening? My vision had gradually reduced to around 30 feet. I had barely noticed it happening, and that didn't feel right. Fog usually dissipated after sunrise. I looked from left to right, but my vision was obscured. Wait. What was that? There was something down the alleyway beside me. Something low down. A wolf? No. A dog. It stepped forward from the mist, a short pitch-black coat, pointed ears and a long snout. It was big, one of the largest dogs I'd ever seen. It didn't bark or sniff the air. It just looked me dead in the eyes as it exited the fog. I stared back at it for a few moments. The word puppy caught in my throat. Then, it began to lean back. I watched something bubble under its skin as it gradually stood up on its hind legs. Its eyes, black as night, burned into mine, like it recognized me. Its mouth cracked and split open, revealing multiple rows of sharp teeth.
You again.
Oh, fuck that. A scream somewhere to the left of me dragged my attention away from this Dogstrocity. Something was happening in the town square. When I glanced back, the creature ahead of me was gone, without so much as a sound. I knew I'd have to deal with it later, so I rushed down the road toward the market. The mist began to clear as I turned the corner. I could see the square. People rushed past me, abandoning their stores and scurrying inside the nearby inn for cover. In the middle of this open space, clear as day, I saw a creature looming over a man desperately clutching a wound, trying to crawl away. This beast had white skin with visible red veins covering its huge form. It must have been 7 feet tall and 600 pounds of pure muscle. Horns protruded from its head alongside sharp, jagged teeth from a salivating maw. It looked like a demon trying to wear human skin a few sizes too small. I had never encountered its like before in any compendium or traveler's story. I reached for my sword and felt nothing. I'd left my sword on the fucking wagon. I was frozen in place, staring at this thing that looked as though it crawled fresh out of the hells. Part of me wanted to turn and run back to the caravan, grab my sword and hope the guards had dealt with the beastie before I got back. What was I going to do without my sword? Oh, but the civilian, I couldn't just leave him. A thought plagued my mind. Was I really ready to die here? For a man I didn't know against a monster I couldn't fight properly? Damn it! I couldn't just let it happen, so whatever I was going to do, I'd have to do it swordless. I rushed forward, vaulting a market stall in a single bound and picking up as much speed as possible with long, fast strides. I gained on it in seconds. I bunched up, pulled my shoulder in, and crashed into the beast. I heard the bone claws on its feet scraping across the floor as it turned to grapple me. It had barely moved. It was strong, much stronger than me. I felt it grip onto my arms, its bladed fingers cutting into my coat. I couldn't shift free. I looked up at the creature's face and was greeted with naught but soulless eyes, a widening mouth full of bloody, jagged teeth, and a swift but painful ending. And I think we'll call it there for today. It's been nice getting to tell the story with no interruptions, especially in an episode where so much happens. Let's hope for another peaceful day to do it again soon. As for now, sun's getting real low. Time for you all to get some well-earned shut-eye, and I'll tell you about how I got out of this mess next time. Till then, adventurers, rest well, and good hunting.